Numerous curling exercises can be great for building the biceps, for the simple fact they can all involve elbow flexion and supination. But let's say you wanted to push me. Could a certain type of curl be slightly more effective than the rest? Maybe. I'm wondering if a curling exercise while the shoulders are extended, such as during an incline curl or face-away cable curl, might be the single most favorable biceps exercise. Why am I wondering this? Due to the origins of the biceps, placing the shoulder into extension stretches the biceps, particularly the long head, since this passes directly over the shoulder joints. In recent years, the power of achieving a stretch of a muscle during an exercise is becoming apparent, though it's worth knowing that the scientific origins of stretch playing a role in hypertrophy stretches back to the 1970s. A range of studies conducted on animals found that when having them stretch various muscles with extreme intensity for a long duration, muscle hypertrophy occurred. Even elite bodybuilders seemingly recognized the importance of stretch. Arnold mentions in his book that incline dumbbell curls are a great exercise, alluding to the stretch being an important factor. Today, we have 3 areas of the scientific literature in humans showing the power of achieving a stretch during an exercise. The isometric training research is the first. For those unaware, isometric training is where you hold a muscle in a static position, and we have 3 studies that demonstrate isometric training at a stretched muscle position produces more hypertrophy than isometric training at a shortened muscle position. An important consideration with this data is all 3 of the studies looked at the quadriceps muscle, so we can't be certain the same applies to the biceps. However, the second area of the scientific research, comparing different range of motions, potentially indicates the biceps do respond to stretch. 2 studies, one by Sato and the other by Pedrosa, have compared performing a preacher curl with a partial range of motion at the initial position to a partial range of motion at the final position. You can lift heavier loads with a partial range of motion in the final position, and this was adjusted for in both studies. Now, preacher curls don't optimally stretch the biceps since this exercise is performed in shoulder flexion. Even so, the subjects in both studies that trained with a partial range of motion at the initial position would have been stretching the biceps more than the subjects training with a partial range of motion at the final position. If the biceps do not benefit from being exposed to a stretch, we'd expect similar hypertrophy between both groups. But the Sato study found elbow flexor growth across 3 regions tended to be superior for the partial range of motion at the initial position. When we average growth across the 3 regions, it's evident elbow flexor growth was superior with a partial at the initial position. As for the Pedrosa study, elbow flexor growth was measured at the 50% and 70% upper arm regions, and at the 50% region, thickness gains were actually similar between both groups, but at the 70% region, gains were superior for the partial at the initial position. If we add both regions, we can see growth favored the partial at the initial position. An interesting consideration is that both studies found considerably more gains at the 70% region for the partial at the initial position. This phenomenon of stretched exercises growing this region of a muscle substantially have also been found with the quadriceps muscle group. We do actually have another study comparing different range of motions with a biceps exercise that further suggests the biceps may grow more when exposed to stretch. This is a 2011 study by Pinto which also had subjects train a preacher curl. One group of subjects trained with a full range of motion, while another group of subjects trained with a partial range of motion in the middle position. Increases in elbow flexor growth at around the 60% upper arm length favored the full range of motion group. Considering the findings of the Sato and Pedrosa studies, I think these results are probably in large part since the full range of motion group achieved greater stretch of the biceps. An important consideration with all this range of motion data is although it indicates the stretched part of a preacher curl is great for building muscle, it of course cannot prove an even greater stretch achieved with curls and shoulder extension would be even better for biceps hypertrophy. Nonetheless, the third area of scientific literature comes from data on the triceps. The triceps generally consist of the long, medial, and lateral heads. All 3 heads pass over their elbow joints, but the long head specifically passes over the shoulder joint as well, and when you place the shoulder into flexion, the long head of the triceps is going to be stretched. This is quite similar to the biceps long head, We know this passes over the shoulder joint too and will be stretched during shoulder extension. An overhead extension is a triceps exercise that will train the long head of the triceps in a stretched position, since this exercise is performed with the shoulders flexed. And here's the key point. A great study last year by Mao compared overhead extensions to pushdowns, and found that overhead extensions produced greater long triceps head volume increases. Fascinatingly, the overhead extensions also produced greater combined medial and lateral head volume increases as well, a finding that was unexpected, but nicely demonstrates a point many people tend to forget, that there are likely still things we do not fully know about muscle hypertrophy. Of course, we'll dissect this study by Mao plus other relevant research in our ultimate guide to developing the triceps that should be released in the upcoming weeks. In total, these three areas of the scientific literature collectively aren't crystal clear proofs curls with shoulder extension are the single most hypertrophic exercise, but I think they're sufficient for us to hypothesize it could be. Despite these three areas of the scientific literature, there's a chance you may have come across people suggesting the biceps should not grow more when exposed to stretch. Their belief seems to stem from research looking at the length-tension relationship of the biceps sarcomeres. I don't believe this research is strong enough to warrant a full explanation of it in this video, so for those interested in a full dissection of it, my views can be found at the link on screen. Essentially, I simply do not believe we can look at one area of the scientific literature that has an array of potential limitations and make definitive conclusions about whether the biceps grow more in response to stretch or not, especially considering when other areas of the scientific literature, as we analyzed, provide solid grounds to speculate the biceps may indeed grow more in response to stretch. I will point out for the same reasons people speculated the triceps should not grow more in response to stretch. That is, they believed the length-tension relationship studies on the triceps sarcomeres meant the triceps shouldn't grow more when exposed to stretch. But as we saw with the mouse study released last year, the triceps long head grew more in response to stretch. Nevertheless, you can be sure that if any future research emerges about how the biceps may respond to stretching-based exercises, we'll have a video on the House of Hypertrophy to update you all. For those interested in guidance or ideas about programming for hypertrophy, you may be interested in our partner Alpha Progression, a tremendous app that includes a custom workout generator. The training variables deployed are grounded in various meta-analyses and systematic reviews from the scientific literature, plus there's great flexibility. You can factor in what equipment you have, so if you only have dumbbells, no problem, how long you want your workouts to be, how often you want to train. Furthermore, the workouts are still editable to your liking, allowing you to individualize things as you see fit. The app also has other great features. It provides neat graphs that can display your long-term progression, and there's a database with over 550 exercises, with excellent video and text tutorials behind each. The link in the comments and description gives you everything on the app for 2 weeks completely free, and if you like it and go beyond, the link gives you 20% off a subscription. We don't just partner up with anybody at the House of Hypertrophy, so you can rest assured the app is seriously quality. As an additional part to this section, we know incline curls and cable face-away curls are two ways you could train the biceps in a great stretched position. But are there any differences between either of them that makes one better than the other? Some suggest cable face-away curls are better as they provide more consistent biceps force production throughout the range of motion versus incline curls. However, I'm skeptical this matters that much for hypertrophy. If training a muscle with consistent force production throughout a range of motion was crucial for muscle hypertrophy, variable resistance should build more muscle. For those unaware, variable resistance is typically achieved with machines that vary the resistance throughout the range of motion, resulting in the muscle being challenged near equally throughout it. 4 studies have examined the effectiveness of training with variable resistance compared to using normal resistance, and all of them find similar muscle hypertrophy between the two. 2 of these involved biceps training. One of them was this 2018 paper, which compared variable to normal resistance machine preacher curls, and found similar arm circumference gains between the two. The second one was this 1995 study, which again compared variable to normal resistance preacher machine curls, and observed similar biceps cross-sectional area gains between the two. Since these 2 studies only used the preacher curl, it's not a guarantee that these findings apply to curling with the shoulder extended, but I do think it could be the case that regardless of the resistance profile of an exercise, taking your repetitions to or at least near failure sufficiently stimulates the biceps. Therefore, I'm currently not sold on the idea that cable face-away curls would truly be superior to incline dumbbell curls, so for now, I'd say an individual should select whichever they prefer. What you just watched was a clip from our free ultimate guide to biceps hypertrophy. Feel free to check out the full video here, or you may wish to check out another one of the House of Hypertrophy's videos.